Hey guys. All right, Brad, you're coming in now. Hey,
Hey,
we're on.
we are.
Awesome. Well, hey everybody, thank you guys for joining us. This is my friend and personal therapist, Dr. Brad Reedy. Where are you, Brad? In Utah right now?
I am Salt Lake City. Yeah.
All right. Someone just said, "Where did my beard go?" It's gone. My beard's gone, but don't worry. This is in abundance right now. So thank you guys for joining us today. It's a pretty crazy time, and I know I've been feeling a lot of anxiety, and my family's been feeling a lot of anxiety, and Brad, as you know, you and I talk, and you talk to my wife, and you have a wonderful new book out that also deals with some of this, and I just thought it could be helpful to just have a really frank and honest conversation about life and about shit and all that nasty stuff that comes up all the time in stressful situations, but all the stuff that's coming up now for so many people because we're living through a time that the majority of the people who are alive on the planet have never experienced. So you can almost sense and feel the anxiety, I think, that so many people are feeling. And I don't have the answers because I'm someone that also wakes up feeling it, and I have to do my best to get through it. So I thought we could just start, and then I have a whole bunch of questions. I had some wonderful people text me questions and leave it in comments, and we'll get to a bunch of those questions. But I thought maybe we could just start with you sharing any therapy wisdom about ways that we can kind of navigate this climate right now.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are a couple of initial thoughts. And number one is, and I've learned this from working with families that are dealing with addiction and mental health issues, when something comes up, you have to do something different. So if you weren't meditating last week and life was going okay, you might need to meditate today. If you weren't reaching out to people, connections socially last week because your stress level and this wasn't happening to all of us, you might need to do that now to be okay. I think we kind of just think, well, I didn't need to do that before, so why would I need to do anything different today? And so I think that's the first thing. The second thing is our fear response really requires one of two things. That's what I've been thinking about. We either have to act, right? Because a fear response is our brain telling us that there's a threat, so we have to do something. So even you and I doing this today is helping me, because now I'm doing something with the energy that I have. So if you can do something productive and helpful, that's fantastic. But if you can't, and the challenge with this particular situation is that some of what we're being asked to do is to do less, to do little, then you have to learn to down-regulate your nervous system. You have to learn to, through meditation or breathing or some kind of mindful focus, down-regulate. So those are some of the first thoughts that I have is you have to do something that you didn't have to do last week. You might have been fine last week, but now you have a new stressor, so you might have to do something. And even you and I doing this, we've never done this before, you and I. Yeah. This is something different we didn't do last week. So that's a good example of doing something different.
Are you seeing a lot of people calling in and coming to see you with heightened levels of anxiety right now?
Yeah, it's been kind of an interesting evolution I've been surprised about. I've been broadcasting all week live to families and parents. And at the first part of the week, there was a tremendous amount of anxiety. I've seen an evolution, actually, where today, this morning, and last night, people are thinking about this as a reset spiritually. Yeah. There's a lot of gratitude coming up. I think one thing that I love about what the Buddhists teach is that the first thing that we think about when we get a toothache is the non-toothache, right? The first thing when you get a toothache is you think, man, I've been taking for granted my non-toothache. Oh, yeah. This right now is making us realize that we've been taking so many things for granted. And so I think it's a time for mindfulness and focus, and will eventually kind of evolve into a gratitude piece for all of us.
Yeah, if you're just joining us, this is my therapist, Brad Reedy, my personal therapist. That's why he's the first person I wanted to do an Instagram live with and a Zoom chat with. This COVID-19 coronavirus is pretty unprecedented. And, I just left the grocery store where everything was gone and there's no toilet paper. There's no anything. People are panic buying. There were, I had gloves on. There was an elderly woman that walked up to me and said, "Do you have any extra gloves?" So I went to the car and I got her some gloves. I was delivering food to another family that has a immunosuppressed person in the house, so they couldn't go out, and everyone's afraid. But I'm curious about the panic buying, because everyone is telling us, "Hey, don't panic buy. There's plenty of food to go around." But yet you go to the stores and we don't even have toilet paper. I was just trying to get a couple rolls. It's all gone. Yeah. How, where does that come from? Where does this panic buying, anxiety, what makes us go buy toilet paper?
That's a great question. I think what happens when we get afraid or anxious, I think for a lot of us, Justin, you, for example, you're a great problem solver. You see a problem in the world and you solve it. And so for a lot of us that are anxious, I struggle with it too. We think that we dive into the anxiety. We think that if we worry enough and think about our worries enough, that we will then find a solution that will prevent pain. Mm-hmm. So I think there's an intoxicating feature of anxiety where we're leaning into it. And what we're learning today, this week, like I said, we might have to social media distance a little bit. We might have to not do things last week that worked for us. And so I think anxiety is like a drug. I talk about it like in terms of Star Wars and the Force and Yoda. There's something that happens when fear snowballs into this place where we think we have to act and lean into it. And we have to learn to deal with it, to relate to our anxiety gently, differently, to look at it, treat it like we would a little child, and realize that anxiety in these situations does not tell us the truth. It lies to us. And for a lot of us, we haven't really gotten into that practice where we realize that anxiety tells us that we're not going to be okay, that everything's going to be horrible. I also want to say one other thing about the question. The people that are joining all those hearts going up, even though we haven't talked to them yet, I just want to say to them, you're doing a good job. You're reaching out, you're doing something, and it's important that you find connection, because right now, one of the features of this pandemic is that we're a little bit more isolated. So anxiety is a drug that can intoxicate us and can lead us to believe the lie that we're not going to be okay.
So what do we do with, the news media and the constant influx of information, some of which is not even real? And you have so many of us who are trying to figure out what's real and what's not, and what are the risks. And even recently they just now said that this thing is airborne, so we have to be even more careful. And for the first 2 months they were telling us that it wasn't. And so you have so many people that are actually legitimately fearful, and to a certain extent we should be, right? So what's the separation between fear and anxiety? Because as a religious person in the Baha'i faith, we're told that a healthy fear of God is okay. Like, we should have a healthy fear of God. Otherwise, we would just do everything we wanted, right? If there was no fear of God, there was no, if we weren't afraid to fall off of a cliff, we would just run off of the cliff and that'd be the end of humanity, right? So the difference between looking at the coronavirus and looking at what's happening in the world and saying, okay, that's scary, and I'm afraid of it, therefore I'm going to take certain actions, versus letting that be all consuming. Like, how do we navigate those two things? Because it's a scary thing, but it also shouldn't consume us. Right.
Oh, that's a really, really common question I'm getting right now, especially with children, parents trying to encourage children to be afraid enough to wash their hands, to participate cooperatively in social distancing, but not so anxious that they can't contain it. And really, the first question about the news is, I think we're going to have to be more intentional about our news and our social media intake than we were 2 weeks ago. I think we're going to have to stay informed, but be limited. As I found myself evolving over the last 10 days or so with social media, for example, I am not indulging myself the way I would have 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago, I would read so many things to just be curious. And right now, I find myself reading so many negative messages, panic messages, even anger messages that I can't indulge myself. I can't just simply consume that. So I think finding reliable sources, non-political sources, the World Health Organization, the CDC, NPR, finding information throughout the day. But really, again, it's that idea that if you just do what you were doing, if you just immerse yourself in social media, which is really tempting right now because we're all at home, I don't think it's going to work for you. And then in terms of finding that line, I think for me, connecting like this, like talking about it with each other and kind of getting a reality check from somebody. I talked to a couple of people this morning about their fear response to this entire thing. And I was able to kind of validate for them, yeah, this is a scary thing. And immediately you could hear, even on the phone, a sigh of relief. Like, yes, that's something to be afraid of. And then, that's the thing, is that we have, in our deepest pain, you know this, you talk about this all the time, our connection soothes us, right? We can go through some pretty painful, difficult, even scary times if we're not alone. So I would say the antidote to the panic, the too much fear, is connection with somebody who can contain it. So connection from somebody who can listen to you and reflect back a sense that you're okay.
I love that. My by the way, Emily just walked in. Your other client.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, Brad.
Hi,
everyone.
Do you have any questions, baby?
Well, I honestly think a lot about all the parents that are at home right now with their kids and trying to figure out homeschooling and a new rhythm of life and, being full-time mom, full-time dad, while also probably working from home while cleaning the house and cooking and trying to figure out groceries. And how do you stay sane through this chapter of juggling so many things? And how do you, what do you do when you stop liking your children?
Or your husband.
Or your
husband. Yeah. We don't know how many pregnancies are going to happen 9 months from now, or how many divorces are going to be filed in a month and a half, right?
We think about that last night.
Right. As with everything, be kind to yourself first. Yeah. You're going to get flooded. You're going to have those feelings you were describing about the children. You're going to have feelings towards each other. And the most important thing, see, our solution, this is the crazy thing, our solution to the problem sometimes is to beat ourselves up. And it works, right? I make a mistake. Don't do that, Brad. That was stupid. You're being ridiculous. I say those things inside my head in real life. And we think that's the solution. And over the short term, it probably helps with some behavioral change. But over the long term, it's damaging to your soul. So be kind to yourselves. Know that both of you, me and my wife and my family, it's not going to be our best functioning. Ram Dass said, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. And if he could have added, he would have said, go spend a week with your family in quarantine. He's trying to teach you, trying to teach me and all of us, be kind to yourself. And hopefully, and what my experience is if you're kind to yourself, Justin, when you snap at her, Emily, when you snap at him, then you can also, that kindness extends to other people. We've talked about that, right? That the relationship that we have with ourselves and learning to love ourselves, so then to our children when they screw up, our spouses when they screw up. So I would say finding a practice of loving kindness toward yourself is the key to navigate the turmoil, the shortness, the tempers, and the things that come out of this.
I want to get to some of these questions that were texted to me, if that's okay. So the first one here is from Lindsay Ross, and she asks, what's a good suggestion for people who have anxiety and are feeling anxious as an extrovert? Which I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
So she's an extrovert and she's feeling super anxious in this quarantine. What's a good suggestion for people like?
Yeah. I want to say this, and I know it might sound a little bit redundant and silly. What was her name?
Lindsay Ross.
The first thing I want to say to Lindsay is, Lindsay, thanks for reaching out to us. Right? Extroverts really value their connection to other people. So Lindsay Ross, thank you for saying something. Thank you for sharing it. Even in your sharing it, there's going to be hundreds of people watching this and listening to this that relate to it and don't feel alone, even though it was just through a text that Justin just read. But again, I had, and I've seen other people doing this. I reached out to a handful of people that I haven't reached out to check in on yesterday. This morning, I got up and started texting friends. I'm a bit of an extrovert when it comes to my fan group, and so we're going to have to find other means to do it. And most importantly, don't judge yourself. Try to be kind to yourself when you find yourself not getting the satisfaction from what's available to you. That's going to happen for you. The greatest suffering, Justin, is when we try to escape our pain and our fear.
Yep.
That's the greatest
Men
suffering.
are very good at that.
Yeah.
We men have been practicing that for a very long time.
Right. Yeah. So I'm glad that she reached out. I'm glad that she said something, and I appreciate it.
So the next question is from Natalie Manzo, who asked, how can I stay calm when it seems like everyone else around me is so overwhelmed all the time? And I find this interesting because, family dynamics are also really tricky. So let's say you're quarantined with your family. Maybe you're 16 or 20, and you're all in this house together, and you have a couple people who are super, super anxious all the time, and you are maybe somebody that has anxiety. How do you balance that? How in a house or an apartment? How do you stay calm when other people are panicking?
I'm going to give you a crazy answer first, and then kind of the bigger answer. I had a client tell me that what she did was her young adult son that was coming home from school, she got him an Airbnb near her house at a really cheap price. And he loved it because he was her trigger and she was his. And they came up with this idea together. And I think what that leads to is the bigger answer, which is, I think we want to be good, and I think we want to be capable, and I think we want to say that I'm not going to get triggered because we're all in this together. But I would say owning your triggers, knowing that and being then mindful of distancing yourself from triggers. See, if you and I were living together, Justin, and we were getting on each other's nerves, my immediate instinct would be to get you to change, right? Like I would start giving opinions about what you need to do to stop bothering me.
Of course, it's always the other person. It's always the other person's fault. Yeah.
So this way of thinking flips it, which is Justin's pacing. And that's a trigger for me because anxiety, by the way, like a lot of emotions, is contagious. We know that from research. So when Justin's pacing, I need to turn around. I need to look away. I need to be in another room. So I learned to be mindful of my triggers and then to take responsibility for when I can, limiting my exposures. And when I can't, because I can't leave the house, I can't I can't go somewhere and visit with some friends to stop watching you go crazy with pacing and biting your fingernails, then it's back to that idea of practicing kindness with myself and saying, I think to love and lean into the fact that you're a fallible and perfect human being offers in itself so much comfort.
It's interesting. It's in the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah says, breathe not the sins of others, so long art thou art thyself a sinner, right? Like, right. The easiest way is to look at our own faults, and we have plenty of them.
Well, I think isn't that this virus? I was thinking, do you know the Serenity Prayer from Alcoholics Anonymous that they use all the time?
I do.
God, grant me the serenity.
So yeah.
God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. This is what alcoholics feel like every day. There is a world out there that for them doesn't feel safe. And guess what works great in the immediate to take care of anxiety? Alcohol. Immediately it goes away. It happens to kill your organs and destroy your life. Other than that, it's a perfect remedy. So those who struggle with addictions and codependency, this is their dilemma every day. And so we are all kind of having the volume of life turned up, which is there's something out there we cannot control. So we're going to have to, and for those of us that are good at controlling things, we're going to have to try something else than trying to control it, because it will breed anxiety in all of us.
You know, you bring up a question for me that I know a lot of men struggle with, and I know you and I have talked about this, but there's a lot of men that have an addiction to pornography.
Right.
It's something that I've battled throughout my life, and this seems like, you know, we talk about the perfect breeding ground for a virus, right? Like you saw all those spring breakers hanging out and partying together in Florida a couple days ago.
Right.
The perfect breeding ground for the virus to spread is that. But if addiction is also like a virus, the perfect breeding ground for alcoholics and for people that are addicted to pornography or drugs or whatever it is literally being stuck in your house with nowhere to go, nothing to do, and having maybe some financial hardships, which I would argue the majority of the world is experiencing. So if you're somebody that is silently battling addiction of anything, especially something as easy to get as alcohol or porn, what are some steps that all of us can take to kind of like keep that at bay during this time? Because the more anxiety that someone's feeling, the faster, like you said, you go to drown it out, right? To deal with that anxiety temporarily.
Right. Well, let's look at what they do to cope with it. They meet. Now, right now, a lot of AA, 12-step groups, organizations are meeting online. So they meet in community. And Justin, they meet in community, and when they sit with each other, it takes away the urge to drink, because it takes away the loneliness of life, of stress, and that's what's happening to all of us. They learn to surrender to a higher power. So whatever your version of a higher power is, it's a surrender is a feeling of, I can't control this. And then that immediately leads to the third thing, which is they develop a practice of prayer, or if you don't believe in a higher power, of meditation. That's the alternative to taking something external, because the solution for the addict, even the codependent, we won't go into that a lot, but the solution to the codependent is, I'm going to control you. You're my drug. If I can get you to behave, then I can feel okay inside. The solution to the sex addict or to the alcoholic is, I'll take something externally to make me feel that sense of well-being. So connection, go online and find places to connect. We're doing, like I said, next week, we're doing this every day for our team, and I'm making it available to the public so people can talk. So find connection, surrender, and then a practice of down-regulating your nervous system that doesn't include something with harmful side effects like disconnection from our partners with pornography, or the effects on the brain and the organs of the body if you take recreational chemicals for it. That's how they do it.
So down-regulating could also be, it could be meditation, could be yoga. Could it be reading? Like, what are some physical examples of down-regulating your nervous system? Yeah.
So you either have to do something active, because there's energy the epinephrine that's being released in your system needs to act. So that's what it's there for, to jump out of a car that's going to hit you. So I started recording my audiobook this week, and for hours I did not worry about the COVID issue. For hours I was separate. Brett Favre had one of his best Monday Night Football games of all time just after his father passed away. And they said, how is that possible? And he said, it was an escape. So if you don't have work, then find a project. Find something to do. Find a writing project or an old project that you've been procrastinating. You can, of course, exercise as a fantastic stress release. And then I think when all of that is exhausted, it's a meditation practice. You've talked about biohacks all the time, right? Start a breathing practice of breathing through your nose. Download one of the many apps online like Calm or Headspace, and start for the first time in your life saying, I'm going to trick my brain into thinking there's not a threat by breathing through my nose and slowing it down, and all of a sudden your brain thinks there's no threat. So projects work.
This is a good time. There's actually a great breathing exercise that I learned about via some of the biohacking channels that I have found that I'd love to share with anybody who's watching right now. It's called box breathing.
Oh yeah.
And essentially, we can all do it together for a second, and maybe it's helpful. But basically, you take 5 seconds of a breath in. So let's all try it together. So breathe in. And then you hold for 5 seconds. And then you release for 5 seconds. And then you hold for 5 seconds. And then you repeat the pattern. And that's something that I found really kind of deregulates my nervous system and helps me calm down. I've been doing cold therapy a lot recently, which has been awesome, like cold showers.
Right.
And I found that actually helps my anxiety a little bit. So if I'm having like one of those anxious mornings and I jump in the cold shower and just breathe like that, I found that it helps me. So I offer
By the way,
anybody who's watching.
By the way, that helped me just now. You did one round of the breathing, and I downregulated a little bit.
Yeah, you can feel it. It's a really cool thing. It's like, and you know, I think if we did 30 of those breaths, right, straight up 5 seconds in, 5 seconds hold, 5 seconds out, 5 seconds hold, I found it to be really, really helpful. And also right before bed, if anybody is like me and you have a hard time kind of quieting your brain and falling asleep, doing some of those breaths right when you get in bed is very helpful, because our sleep pattern, one of the first things that happens is our breathing slows before we actually fall asleep. So it's kind of like a forced version to help us fall asleep. I want to ask some more questions here. So Susan asks, are there any tips or tricks that can help quick relief when someone's having a panic attack? So panic attack comes on. What are some quick things that somebody can do that maybe, and you know, maybe they don't have access to a therapist, or they don't know what to do when they're shaking and there's a panic attack? So what are some quick steps?
There's actually this really, really good trick, and it's hard to do, but it works almost every time if you practice it a bit. The number one key to a panic attack is don't try not to have one. In fact, when I work with people who have panic attacks, what I say to them is I say, I want you to have 5 this week. If they're having 4 or 3, I say, I want you to have 4 or 5. If they're having 2, I say have 3. I teach the people around them not to try to stop them from having it. See, because panic attacks, it's not about the fear, it's about trying to control the fear. Yeah. And guess what happens when you try to have a panic attack? If you develop a practice of trying to have a panic attack, you cannot have one if you're trying. It's impossible. So
So it's reverse psychology for your body.
It kind of is. Yeah.
Wow.
And if you have somebody near you, if you have another person, which obviously helps, teach them this too. Let's say that you were starting to have one and Emily was with you. She would just sit with you. She would just talk to you. She wouldn't try to talk you out of it. She wouldn't get anxious and upregulated to get you to try to stop it. She wouldn't add to it. She would say, I'm with you. Touch my hand. Do you feel that? She would try some grounding exercises like physical, tactile sensations, maybe some breathing. But the important thing is the panic comes when we feel out of control and we try to control it. That's the biggest key. And if that's a pattern in your life, then I would literally, under the direction of a therapist, encourage you to consider the practice of trying to have more panic attacks and watch how they go away. And here's the win-win-win. Let's imagine that you were able to have one and you were trying. Then you would know how to control it. If I could have one right now, I would learn the mechanisms that cause it and I would have more control over it. So it's the control when we're feeling out of control. And that's also about kind of that mindfulness of leaning into your anxiety and saying, I'm feeling it. I also want to say that feeling anxiety and fear means you're also feeling love, because you wouldn't be afraid if you were not attached to anything. And when you start to connect your anxiety to your love, again, you have more compassion and calmness.
Somebody just wrote, and I just caught it, but didn't you just say that you can't make yourself have one? So can you give us like the shortest answer to that same exact question? What do you do if you have a panic attack?
Let it happen.
Give into it.
Give into it.
It's similar to, I have a lot of friends that surf, and when you fight the wave, it takes you over.
Yeah.
Right? So it's just allowing it to happen is the easiest way to get over it. Interesting.
You have panic at this moment. You have a panic attack disorder. You have a panic attack, and it's going to happen. So you go with it. And ideally,
that's all we can do.
I mean, there are things you can do leading up to the panic attack with the breathing, like you talked about, the yoga. There are things, but once I remember watching somebody have a panic attack in church when he was giving a talk, and his response was, and I think people could relate to this, he looked up and he said, "Uh-oh," and then he hit the podium with his head and fell to the ground. He's a friend of mine. And it was too late. When it's like that, it's too late. So yeah, develop a practice of mindfulness and meditation beforehand. But if you're going to have a panic attack and you try not to have it, even me saying that, even if you haven't had it, you can see how that would be counterproductive.
Totally. Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to flag a question that keeps coming up that I'm seeing both in the text messaging and also in the comments. And this is a bit harder. And I've been thinking a lot about this, Brad, is one of the next films I'm working on actually tackles domestic abuse. And I'm getting questions about what happens if you're quarantined with somebody who abuses you. And if you don't feel safe in your own house, what do we? So what do we do in those situations? And what's some advice you could give to people that are feeling not safe in their own home and stuck?
That is a really, really difficult question, and it's difficult because it's kind of a lose-lose, right? The only thing I can say is reach out for professional help. We run a program for adolescents. We run a wilderness program, and we still have clients in our program, right? Because for our clients, it's not an elective procedure. Their lives are at risk right now if they leave, not because of the virus, but because of the drug addiction, of the suicidality, of the mental health issues. And so if domestic violence presents itself as a threat to you, you're going to have to reach out to professionals and organizations and others. You're going to have to break the quarantine to keep yourself safe, right? It's a hierarchy of needs. COVID still would be a risk if you access the normal resources that you and I would talk about every day with domestic violence, but it's a hierarchy. And our kids that are coming to our program, that are in our program, the reason that we are still open is because it's more dangerous at home, even though they're away from home, even though they're out there, even though some of them are traveling to us by car, the risk is greater. So what I would say is you would have to suspend your COVID protocol, if you will, and just do what you would do any day that there is a domestic violent threat, which is contact professional law enforcement groups that help and support people with domestic violence.
And there's like a national domestic violence.
Yes.
There's a national domestic violence hotline.
Yes. I don't have it pulled up right here, but yes.
Okay. Yeah, if you're just tuning in and if you're just watching this, this is an Instagram Live with my good friend and my therapist, Brad Reedy. If you have questions about anxiety and depression, you can go back and watch the beginning. Also, it looks like somebody posted a number for us real quick.
Yeah.
If you are in a situation where you are quarantined with an abuser, you can call 800-799-7233.
Nice.
800-799-7233. Thank you, Lil Ray Cakes, for posting that for us. So yeah, so if you're just tuning in, go back, watch the beginning of this. Brad tackled anxiety and depression. So let me just keep going here. So Taylor wrote, "I'm a teacher. I've been having bad anxiety. I see a therapist and an APRN. I have extra anxiety meds right now, but they make me feel so tired that I have to sleep. How do I get through this time with so much change and demand from teachers?" That's one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about. All of our teachers who are now working from home, who have kids maybe also,
Right.
And teachers that are also struggling with their own version of anxiety and their own version of depression. So how do the teachers that are struggling so much right now get with so much demand?
These are good questions because they're not easy answers. And I guess maybe me saying that to you, is Taylor, I think it was.
Yeah.
Maybe if it was an easy answer, it would be kind of discounting to how hard it is, right? Like if I had simple, quick answers. Like I said earlier, I'm glad that you're writing. I'm glad that you're reaching out to Justin and asking for help. And I can say that I love you, we love you, and we're here for you. And it sounds like you're doing about all that you can do. You're on medication. Man, the demands are high. I read something today where somebody was talking about homeschooling, and I've seen this with our clients before. The advice was, stop trying to accomplish so much. Like, just sit with your kid and read. It's going to be okay for all of our children across this country if they fall behind on the lesson plans that were in place before all of this happened. So instead of maybe lower your bar about things to accomplish as a teacher or a parent, like don't set your expectations so high. Because again, this has been a theme all throughout this broadcast, right? We have to adjust our expectations. We can't simply say, well, I'm going to try to meet the same goals and objectives that I was 10, 15 days ago, because that's going to make you crazy. So part of what I would say to her is, when I have a group of kids that are really low functioning, going crazy, angry, anxious, I tell my staff, here's your job. Keep them safe. Read a story. Make sure their feet are clean. Make sure they're hydrated. And all of a sudden you can see the staff relax because they're like, oh, good. I'm glad we didn't have to work on our CBT skills today. I'm glad we didn't have to accomplish 3 group therapy sessions that you assigned us last week. So I think lowering our expectations and realizing that we're going to be okay if we minimize our goals and just reduce it to the most simple things, which right now is keeping safe and being okay. That's probably what I would say to her.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for asking that question, Taylor. Here's a question from Claudia, and this is also a question from Justin and Emily from the Baldoni house. So children are obviously exposed to all of this in one way. And whether or not we're talking about it in a language they can understand, they feel us.
Right.
And they know things are changing. They're not at work anymore, or they're not at school anymore. Daddy's not going to work. He's working from this small little room in the back. How do we help our children and not pass on our anxiety to our children? I know one of the things, Brad, that you and I talk about in our personal therapy sessions is the idea that we're always going to mess up our kids.
Right.
No matter how perfect we think we're always going to mess up our children.
Right.
However, in a time like this, what are some things that we can do to limit how much we're messing them up? Because we don't want them to have massive anxiety because their parents have anxiety.
Right. We had an earthquake here in Salt Lake City yesterday that woke us up. And that was ridiculous. To wake up to a 5.7 earthquake, I was like, okay, seriously?
In the middle of all of this.
Yeah. Like, things are falling off my shelves, and that's waking us up. So I come upstairs, my children come upstairs, we meet in the kitchen, and I make some joke about a swarm of locusts. I said, if a swarm of locusts comes, I'm out of here. And my 17-year-old said, in all seriousness, he said, hey, could you guys not make any jokes about the end of the world because I'm already anxious enough and I won't be able to take the jokes. And I was thinking to myself, well, that was kind of an anxiety relief for me and my wife, but not for him. And so the first thing, I say this, the first thing you should know about me is I'm not you. And then a lot more will make sense after that. So I think we have to understand that we have different needs than our children. Mm. And if you and Emily need to vent and need to stress out and need to consume some news, you might not be able to do that around them. They'll need different things than you need. And I think we have to be very intentional about talking in front of them, about information and news that's coming into the home, and even about something as simple as what I thought was a big stress relief for me. But luckily I have a 17-year-old who can articulate himself. I started to think, oh yeah, I have to be careful of even the jokes because they're listening to words like fear, anxiety, pandemic, death.
Yeah.
So we have to be mindful of what we're doing. I mean, this applies in general, but I think right now, like I'm saying, it's heightening all of these principles in psychology and therapy and mental health that are present all the time.
Mm. Awesome. So just being aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, Emily and I are really working on that right now because, you hear something new and you want to repeat it, and then you're like, oh, wow, the kids are right here, and they're absorbing everything we're saying.
Right.
Everything we're saying. Let's see here. So many things. Do you have recommendations for college students about finding a good routine? Whether it's to do classwork. This is from Megan, because obviously we're not really built to be able to work from home, hence the reason colleges and workplaces exist. And I actually think her question is good for anybody who's watching who has to work from home or has to do schoolwork from home in a place that's not really set up for that. Our home life is not really set up for that for a reason.
Right.
What are some things that students can do that are watching this that still have to turn in reports or still have to do their homework, or people that are working like myself or you? What are some things that they can do to be able to have some sort of schedule to work from home so they don't fall too behind?
Pace yourself, right? Pace yourself in what's going on for you, because you have a long day now. You have a long day. And definitely take some walks. When I was recording my book here at the computer, I had to walk outside. Walk around in my backyard, walk up and down my street. So pace yourself. Give yourself a little bit more time. Take space from each other in the home. I think is important. Like I said, not everybody might be able to get an Airbnb for their child who's coming home from college, but you might need to be in different places in the house to do that. And then kind of tag team responsibilities as much as you can. And again, this is the key thing. I can come up with every rational solution. We could ask people for every rational solution, and in the end, this is going to be harder than normal. Right? There's going to be some challenges. We're going to stumble more than we stumble when we don't have COVID on top of everything else that we have, and the financial and the familial dynamics that come along with it. So again, I know I'm a broken record with this, but be kind to yourselves as you stumble through this, no matter how great the solutions and the practical tips are.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to just take two more questions here. I saw one pop up, and I don't remember who it was from, but I want to applaud their bravery. She asked, what are some tips for somebody who's quarantined and who's prone to self-harm?
I'm just having a lot of compassion for that, because again, you're asking, I guess this is what you're doing. You're asking really, really good questions. I would reach out to Write Love on Her Arms. TWALA.com or .org is a great organization that can give you some resources and support. I believe it comes from the idea that instead of cutting and self-harming, they taught people to write on themselves as a way to understand that just like every other escape that we have from pain and fear, cutting is an escape. Alcohol, pornography, all of it's an escape from our pain. And so I think connect to groups. If you're suicidal, connect to the National Suicide Hotline. And it's not always the same thing. Connect to twala.org, to write love on her arms.org, to get some connection, to get some community in there. But then all of the other things, I'm going to say something a little bit really out there in just a moment, but to utilize all of the regular things that we're talking about to manage our anxiety with projects and exercise and down regulation through meditation. Mindfulness is a very big practice in the field of self-harm. It is one of the most common skills. And then I would say, if you relapse, I could say this with, I want to say this with so much love. If you relapse in some self-harm that's not life-threatening, be kind to yourself about it. Because what happens when somebody relapses on something like self-harm that's not life-threatening and they're not kind to themselves, guess what happens? They feel horrible about it. They dislike themselves more, and then they find a way to punish themselves even more by doing it more. So if it's not life-threatening, if it's life-threatening, call the suicide hotline or 911. But if it's not life-threatening and you have some relapses, be kind to yourself. We're all going, it's like going home for the holidays. We're all going to regress. We're going to turn into our more primitive versions of ourselves. And just knowing that regression is common during times of stress and in certain contexts can help us to not beat ourselves up over it, which adds to whatever else we're dealing with.
Thank you. Thank you, Brad. By the way, for all of you people writing and telling me to cut my hair, come on. Can we just talk about this for a second? That's not very nice. We're talking about mental health and anxiety. And I just want to point at something. And again, as a celebrity, we're open to it. But I think it's important that we remember that we're all human.
Yeah.
Right? So for those of you that are telling me to cut my hair and that I look bad, come back down into your hearts for a second. And thank you for those of you who are saying don't cut your hair. But we're not talking about hair. We're talking about something far more important than that. So I would kindly ask you to go back and rewatch the video. And if you're somebody who's writing about physical appearances right now, maybe there's some work that you have to do to go deeper to figure out why you're commenting on that and not actually talking about the things that you're feeling. So we all have our reactions to things, and some of us go straight to jokes when things are uncomfortable.
Right.
Some of us go straight to commenting on other people's appearance or making other people feel bad to bring themselves up. It all comes down to the same thing, which is that at some point, at some place in all of us, we're all hurting. We're all wounded. We're all broken, and we're all trying to figure out how to piece ourselves back together, which is the point of this. So,
Justin, can I say something about your hair that's not superficial?
Yeah.
Can I? Because I think it's a good metaphor. I've seen you over the years go from clean cut, Raphael, to a bearded man who looks like he lives in a cabin in Montana, to I've seen you partially shaven where you shave like half your face, and you're beautiful, and I mean this. You are beautiful in every way that I've ever seen you. Oh, and I think that's the symbol of what you're describing. It doesn't matter because you are so beautiful every single way that I've seen you look.
I appreciate that. I appreciate it. What people don't realize is, actually make this is so, and we should, and why not talk about it? The whole point of this is to get as real as possible. But
right.
I'm making a conscious effort now to try to not look great when I am appearing on social media. And I think that, and for me, it's important because I just want to be myself, because social media asks us to generally be something we're not, right? Constantly sharing the best part of ourselves, which has a tendency to make other people feel less than.
Right.
And I think it's important to just hey, this is me. And pedestals are not, I don't like pedestals.
Horrible places to live.
And because when you're on a pedestal, you have a lot farther to fall. So all that being said, I think it's important we show up as we are. And I think that this is an important thing to note. You can take it as appearances, you can take it with your social media, and you can bring it right back into your quarantined house with your family. Is I think it's okay for us to show up as we are and to not try to like hide these things we're feeling or to push them down. Because Brad, and you can tell me the expert version of this, but my feeling of it is the more we suppress our feelings and our anxiety and our emotions, the bigger the burst and the explosion later on, which leads to these panic attacks and which leads to these things. Because if I'm never admitting to myself how I feel, then that creates a bigger blow up or an explosion later that unfortunately so many people that we're closest to have to then deal with or pick up. Versus kind of letting the air and the pressure out a little bit at a time so that it doesn't explode. So I'm sure there's you have a better way of saying that, but that's my version of it.
Well, I don't know that I have a better way. When I was running Ironmans, I had a coach who said to me, if you start to feel a pain during your run, concentrate on it, not away from it. He ran 200-mile races. His coach ran the Sahara Desert in the documentary, Running the Sahara. So he had some experience with it. And he said, I want you to focus on a pain when you feel it, because if it's an injury, then you need to stop. But if it's not, you're going to injure yourself. And so when we think about that. If you have an injury and you try to exercise and you try to favor that injury, you will get injured. If you have a pain and you favor it, you will get injured. So our natural instinct is to go away from it, to escape pain, to avoid it. But that's how we cause the greatest damage to ourselves, is, like you said, to not feel it. The other thing I would add, Justin, is I think there's a lot of good press around the idea of showing up as we are. And I think it's important press. It gets a lot of the good stuff out there. What you and I talk about all the time is you have to find somebody, at least one person, who can tolerate you the way you are, who can avoid the instinct to be helpful, to fix you, and can just witness you as you are. And that's the real way that I've found healing, is when I get to be my horrible, rotten self. That's the subtitle of my book, Learning to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self. When I get to be my horrible, rotten self and my therapist just says, okay, I start to love myself. And I can't do that on my own. I need somebody to see me.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite things about our sessions individually, is talking and learning to be okay with those parts of ourselves that we hide, the ugly parts of ourselves that we don't want anyone else to see, that we're embarrassed by, and learning how to love those parts of ourselves. And that's what your book is about, that I think is really beautiful, because I think that if we could all learn how to love those ugly parts of ourselves, and I think, I could be wrong, but I think a lot of those ugly parts are going to come out in our quarantine situation right now. We don't have all the distractions of the world.
Right.
We don't have the gyms and the movie theaters and the clubs and the bars and all that. So we don't have all these distractions. In some ways, this is a therapy dream, to be forced to sit with ourselves globally for a second, and just take notice. In the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah says that we must know ourselves and know what brings us to loftiness or abasement, right? And the things that make us soar and are lofty and are live in our higher nature, and the things that suck us down to our lower nature. And the only way that I've ever learned that you can do that is by being conscious and mindful of where you are and who you are. And that means sitting with the shit, sitting with that crap. And wow, what a blessing, if you think about it, that quarantine kind of helps you and makes you do. I was talking to one of my best friends who just recently got over a breakup, another one of your clients, so I'm not going to say his name. And he was saying actually how much of a blessing it was to be forced to sit with himself right now. Because after a breakup, he normally acts a certain way. And he has no other option than sitting in his own shit and figuring out and going in and dealing with it. And And I think that's an exciting opportunity for all of us. And before we go, this was a question that I think is important. It's something that I would struggle with, honestly, because I have a history of wanting to take care of everybody. But a question came up that was, what do you do if you are quarantined with people or you have family members that are not taking this virus seriously and you're worried about them?
Yeah. You know, I've had a little bit of experience with that personally this last couple of weeks. You know, first and foremost, it's important to take care of yourself, and so I think you can set some boundaries around. You know, if people are exposing themselves, I'm not talking about your children, because your children under 18, you can manage
family
them.
members, parents, grandparents, friends that are just not taking it seriously or going out.
You can set boundaries and say, I can't. You have to make a choice. You have to make a choice between. I have MS, and therefore I'm on immune suppressant medication, so I'm at high risk, and so I have to tell people, you know, in my family, I said I might not survive this if I get it. So even if you want to be casual with it and you don't want to do it for you, number one, you can do it for me or for the other people that are vulnerable, right? That social contribution you're making. But in the end, except for my little children who I can actually control and not let go outside, but my adult children, for example, I can say, if you're going to expose yourself to other people, you can't live with us right now because I won't be able to survive it, or else I'm going to have to go somewhere else. So I think it's that boundary. It's, you can do what you want. I hope that the social contribution aspect of it will motivate you, but in the end, you might have to make some choices, and one of them be, I'm going to have to protect myself and my young children if there's going to be choices that you make like that.
Thank you, Brad, and a special burst of love and energy to all of my friends who are immunosuppressed and who are fighting chronic illnesses and diseases. You know, I've been telling the stories of amazing people who have terminal cancers and chronic illnesses for the last almost 8 years now via this documentary series, My Last Days, which I actually think could be an amazing thing. If you're interested in watching it, Google My Last Days, watch some of these stories, and you see these are the real warriors and the superheroes that many of them have been living like this their entire lives. The rest of the world now is having to live like this for a second. And I've been hearing a lot from my friends, Brad, like you, that are on immunosuppressants, who just have weaker immune systems, that this is far scarier than just what they were normally. So I think it's important for all of us to keep that in mind. For those of us that don't take this seriously, sometimes in love, we have to sacrifice.
Yeah.
And we're asked to sacrifice for the betterment of the whole, or for the other person.
Right.
And to a certain extent, we're all being asked to sacrifice for so many people who have weaker immune systems. And at the end of the day, I think that, and hopefully that's something that we can do. And finally, Brad, if there's any, aside from your book, which I will give people a link to your book, which I think will be really helpful. I'm actually going to be reading your book with my parents, since we're all in quarantine together.
Nice.
So my parents and I are going to read a chapter, and along with my sister, of your book, and then discuss it and talk about it. What are like maybe 3 things, if we could just distill it down to 3 things that everybody who's on this call or anybody who watches this can do right now to just have a little bit of an easier time dealing with what's happening in the world and their anxiety? Just 3 things. It could be things you've already said, just 3 simple things.
Practice breathing. Practice mindful breathing. Go online, find an app, but practice mindful breathing. That's number 1. Number 2, reach out to each other. Call, FaceTime, do what you can to connect. And just, you're not going to fix anything. When I got MS, I called a friend who had a lot of MS in his family, and I didn't even know why I called him, because he's not my closest friend. But when I called him on the way home from the hospital, he was 27 years old. And this is only a few years ago. He's my son's friend, actually. And his name is Tyler Osmond. He's one of the Osmonds. And he said to me, at 27, he said, "I love you and you're not alone." And I burst into tears because I didn't know I needed that. He couldn't fix it. He couldn't cure it. He couldn't give me, I'll get you in touch with a protocol to fix it. So connect to people. And then I think the third one is find a spiritual practice of surrender. Get in touch with a 12-step group with and Justin, you might have others, but we recommend 12-step groups. We recommend NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and we also recommend Refuge Recovery, a Buddhist-inspired recovery groups, and they're having online services, all of those now. So get in touch with a spiritual practice. You might not have needed it 15 days ago, but this isn't 15 days ago. So those are my 3 things.
Thank you so much. And a quick breathing exercise for all of you. We call it box breathing. 5 seconds in, 5 second hold, 5 seconds out, 5 second hold. Repeat the process. And we're going to be doing more of these. So I'm going to do more of these. Brad, I'm sure we should probably do another one soon. And if you missed a part of this, it's going to be up on my stories for the next 24 hours. If somebody actually wants to record this for us and repost it, please feel free. I'm
hosting a session every day next week. If people want to reach out to Brad at evoketherapy.com, I'll open it up to the public, and we do a meditation to begin, and then we just share love and hope, and we share our fear, but we're not alone in it. So we're doing that all next week, every day.
So if you are somebody who has anxiety, who is fearful, who's struggling, who was just laid off, who is a small business that doesn't know how they're going to make their rent, who's a parent of children that are wild and crazy in the house and you don't like them anymore, who's quarantined with an abuser, who is bipolar disorder, who has an addiction of some sort, who's a college student that's not going to get to graduate this year or is trying to study. If you are alive right now, if you are watching this, you are not alone. You are loved. And we will get through this. And Brad, can you tell everybody the name of your book?
I have a copy of it right here, just in case.
Hold it up, man. Hold it up.
It is called, and I reduced it on Amazon to the lowest possible price during this. It's called The Audacity to Be You, Learning to Love the Horrible Rotten Self. And I'm jealous because your wife, I told her this, she wrote an endorsement for it, and I was immediately jealous and angry because it's the very best thing written in my entire book. So
that was so funny is I got jealous of her because I could tell you liked her endorsement more than mine. And I'm like, awesome, everybody. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please rewatch this if it's helpful to you. We're going to try to figure out how to pull this off stories and repost it. At least reposting parts of it, and you're not alone. So sending all of you so much love. Thank you for being a part of this community, and I look forward to doing this again with both you, Brad, and with some of my other friends and experts over the next few weeks. So thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Justin. Love you. Love you all.
I love you, brother. Bye, everybody.